Welcome to Value-Based Voices, a podcast from the Association for Value-Based Cancer Care. Each episode dives into the shifting terrain of cancer care in the United States, exploring what value means today from a clinical policy and a patient-centered perspective. Our mission is to spark, inform conversations, dialogues, and promote transparency with every stakeholder, from providers to payers to patients, with the insights that we all need to navigate cancer care with clarity, confidence, and purpose. So let's get into it. My name is Burt Zweigenhaft. I'm the founder and executive director of the Association for Value-Based Cancer Care. I'm your host today, so you're stuck with me. But today, more importantly, we have a great guest, Jeff Berkowitz, CEO of Real Endpoints, an industry advisory and analytics firm delivering solutions to enhance appropriate access and innovation. And today we're discussing Healthcare 2026 and kind of a look at what we saw, because Jeff and I were both at JP Morgan last week, and it's kind of the linchpin of the start of the health year for most of us in this sector. So welcome, Jeff, and thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Bert. Always a pleasure to be with you. Looking forward to the discussion.
So Jeff, how many years have you been doing JP Morgan?
20, something like that.
Yeah, I think so. I think you and I might even go back to the H&Q days, the Hamburger and Quest days, right? When Dennis Purcell had started it before JP Morgan bought it. And every year it changes, but what was like the most dramatic thing that you felt, you heard, or you saw, or you observed at JP Morgan this year?
Boy, that's a good question. Most dramatic. I would almost say this will sound funny, but I'd say maybe the most dramatic thing was a lack of drama overall. It was a fairly muted meeting in my mind. If you ask me, there weren't any major announcements. There weren't any major skirmishes. There was a little bit of not so much business as usual, but not all of the concern that we've seen, in some of the past meetings where there was a lot more angst around the biotech winter or things that the administration was doing and pricing or what did AI mean. To me, it was actually the opposite of dramatic. It was a fairly pragmatic meeting where people were really not worried so much about some macro things, that people felt a comfort level that they knew what things were going to look like foundationally for 2026, like pricing issues, like issues related to AI. AI, an example, everybody was talking about it, but this was the first time that I think more practical solutions and business cases versus just talking about it nebulously.
That's interesting. So, I guess when I also say dramatic, I think there wasn't a lot of drama, but this meeting seemed to have been a lack of M&A activity and a lack of capital deployment over the last 2 years, maybe on the back end of COVID and uncertainty in the markets. And I would have expected, Jeff, that given MFN and IRA and the government programs and all the announcements with the administration and everything, that might have created more of a whirlwind of what is going to happen, what is going on here, and maybe more drama. But you didn't see that. So if you had to take that apart,
Yeah,
why?
it's interesting. And actually, the one big deal that was announced with Merck and Revolution ends up not moving forward, actually. So there really wasn't anything major that happened. In my mind, in answer to your question, it was a little bit of also haves and have-nots. The organizations that are doing really well, or the large organizations, well-funded organizations, were able to still have productive conversations. There were certainly tons and tons of people that are having licensing conversations and BD conversations, but if you really didn't have something that was differentiated or in a class with a lot of excitement, it's getting harder and harder, I think, to do the fundraising, creating sort of these haves and have-nots. People that have a good story are really interested and interesting and are getting a lot of conversations. People with a less compelling story, it's just getting that much harder. I use Zealand Farm as an example. I'm on the board of Zealand. It's a company focused on obesity. Obviously, this year, a tremendous amount of discussion around obesity, right? That's a little bit of that lemmings effect or that Gardner's playing soccer effect that we always see. A couple of years ago, it was cell and gene therapy. Then it was ADCs and radioligand therapy. Last year and this year, it's all obesity all the time, particularly on the heels of the
GLPs.
Pfizer and GLPs and what they mean.
Mhm. So there's plenty of cash in the marketplace, but there's still not any really good places to place it. That seemed to be the buzz. If you went around the venture capital rooms, the private equity rooms, and even the corporate rooms that are around the hotel, I guess what 30,000 people show up there every year. Only about 5,000 at the conference and
Yeah,
25,000 in alternate sites, right?
amazing.
So is
And I
that
think
kind of right?
Yeah, I think to your original question on the drama, one of the things you talk about 30,000 people doing there, and in my mind, one of the key misses were the people that were not there. So JP Morgan, the healthcare conference had
Mhm.
always been cross-functional and matrixed, and certainly for me, having come both from pharma and retail, and especially pharmacy and payer, I'm a big believer in having all of those people across the ecosystem being in the room together to have discussions to sort of figure out some of these bigger thornier problems. So in my mind, that sort of silence was a little bit deafening with the rest of the supply chain of the payers being there. Obviously, we're still recovering from the safety issues that happened with United Health Group, but it's really remarkable to know that those other players are just not there. And it's creating a little bit, while I say the science is deafening, it's also creating a little bit of an echo chamber on the part of biotech and pharma because we're talking to ourselves a little bit rather than figuring
Themselves.
out how to plug in and solve, broader
Yeah.
healthcare problems.
So why was, the typical insurers, the health plans, the ones that have been there for years, anchored as big part. I understand last year with the precautionary activity given the, unfortunate incident with United Healthcare's CEO. And they were obviously absent last year. But why this year? I mean, that was over. And, I didn't even see a ton of security around the building this year. In past, even before the United situation, there was always protesters, there was always a lot of security. This year was kind of lax. And you're right, they weren't there. And you're a great steward of that observation because you've been in corporate America and in the wholesale, the distribution side, the payer side, the Walgreens and that experience.
Yeah.
So why weren't they there, Jeff? What do you think?
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that question. I think they should have been there. I don't know if it's. I certainly don't think it was the safety issue anymore. To your point, I think one of the problems is that we've all gotten so we just continue to be completely polarized. You say I joke because as I've said, I've been in pharma and then at Walgreens with drug distribution and especially pharmacy, and then at United Health Group and payer.
Mhm.
And I often say I'm scarred by the disconnects in the healthcare system as it relates to pharma.
Yep.
And in my mind, in order to have productive conversations, particularly in an era of GLP-1s where we think that that can help solve a lot of healthcare problems, the
Mhm.
conversations would have been so much more productive and robust if
Yeah.
the payers and the pharmacy benefit managers and the wholesalers were all there together so we could actually have a broader dialogue around where these therapies that
Yeah.
we're developing from a biotech and pharma perspective fit into broader healthcare savings that are going to make the system more affordable
Yeah.
broadly so we can continue to invest in additional solutions and R&D and all of that
So
stuff.
I'm going to challenge you on this. And I have an opinion like everyone. I want to see if maybe you might agree or disagree with this. One is um, affordability, big word out there, and you see it on the nightly news every day. Healthcare, PBM investigations, middlemen, gross to net, health plans and PBMs, who a lot of them, because they're verticals, these insurance companies today with a lot of integrated services, they're under fire. They're under a lot. I think they were told to stand down and not be out there because they having a very hard time defending their position in the background of legislation maybe going against them in a lot of these cases in their business world.
Yeah. I don't think they're cowards. Having been an executive at United Health Group, I mean, these guys are, sort of feel good about where they are. My view, Bert, and I may be more cynical, is that there's really been limited incentive for disruption in the system and the way healthcare is delivered today. You've got this, you just made the point, we've got these vertically integrated entities and these horizontally huge organizations where payers own pharmacy benefit managers, have relationships with wholesalers, have relationships with retailers and drug distributors. And you've got 3 to 5 players that are delivering care to 85% of the US population. And so, in my mind, we've been talking about potential disruption on the PBM side. And I may be a contrarian here because everybody always wants to talk about PBM reform and that the model is broken and they don't add any value. We've been talking about this for the 25 years that I've been in this system. I just saw
I've
one of
been
my
there
old
with you. I agree.
I just saw one of my old mentors, Fred Hassan, the other night at a pharma event down here in Florida. I remember when I would drag him around to payers to discuss non-sedating antihistamines with Caremark, the PBM. He'd say, "Why are you bringing me to the PBMs? They add no value." Here we sit 25 years later, and they're bigger, stronger, more integrated than ever. I think the flip side of that, Bert, is that everybody constantly comes to me and asks about the disruptors, Mark Cuban, Amazon, the Waltz Healths of the world. Everybody wants to talk about lives being
Right.
picked out of this integrated system. But at the end of the day, even Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, and JP Morgan themselves wanted to be disruptors, but couldn't do it. And Amazon's been trying to disrupt the PBM world since 2017 when they first
Yep.
applied
And
for
made that
pharmacy
acquisition. Right.
licenses. So I'm a little bit of a contrarian in that I think there's limited
Mhm.
incentive for disruption of the status quo as it exists today, which is why I think it's really important for those players to be at an organization like that, because at a meeting
All
like
right.
JP Morgan. Because we need to discuss things cross-functionally, not click our heels together 3 times and wish that the system
Yeah.
as it exists today wasn't the system.
Look, I entirely agree with you. I stand by, I think, my claim that I believe that lawyers and others in public relations arms of these verticals told them not to be out in the front.
Yeah,
They're trying to
definitely.
avoid it. And not to say that they're not brave but I agree with you. They should be out there and they should be part of the conversation. And it does us no good. And that's why it was a vacuum this year. I think you're right that we ended up with kind of a everyone around the table all wearing the same suit, all agreeing on the same things. Okay, yeah, sure. Where's the contrarian? Where was the argument? Where was the differential here? It wasn't
And
there.
one of the places where that really manifested itself, and I think one of the key themes that we kept hearing over and over again at JP Morgan was this idea of direct to patient, right?
Hmm.
The growth of the GLP-1s and obesity has all of pharma thinking about new models, which I think is a good thing. And I think the GLP-1s and the obesity drugs are really driving different thinking in our industry for the first time, really in a decade.
Right.
Really different, innovative thinking. But and direct to patient being one of those. But again, without the other players being there, we really don't know what that means or where it can work. So everybody wants to talk about direct to patient, new models, shipping direct to patient, reimbursing direct to patient, have patients paying directly. But without the payers and the PBMs there, we're not going to solve for that. And most importantly, none of that direct to patient dialogue does anything around what you just mentioned, which is affordability. Nothing addresses issues around patient affordability even in a direct to patient world. And we just don't know whether or not direct to patient opportunities are unique to certain products and classes like GLP-1s, or they're going to lend themselves
Mhm.
broadly to the delivery of healthcare.
Okay. So we both observed the absence of the health payers, but who's the biggest payer in the country? Medicare and
United,
Medicaid, the government.
well, yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, you're
not right. More dollars. Okay.
yeah.
I'm just counting dollars here. Who was there this year? Who's typically not there in a big resounding way? You don't see HHS, you don't see CMS, you don't see Medicaid. And who was there this year? Dr. Oz and Chris Klopp and all their staff and Abe Sutton and others. And they were all over. They were not only just on the main stage, but they were talking at all the sidebar meetings and really mixing it up. So that to me was very unusual. For you, how do you
Yeah,
what what
no, that's a great. It's a great insight, and not only were they there, in many ways, it feels like they were welcomed with open arms into the dialogue, which I think is fine. By the way, and I think you know they had rightfully so places at the table for big conversations, and I think it was probably an important part and clearly our industry has shown when I say our industry I mean the pharma side of things has shown a willingness to have that dialogue and to play along in many ways. That's what I mean about sort of the absence of drama. Last year, there was so much angst around everything that the administration might do. This year, it felt like just a greater comfort level that at least we know what we're up against and we can manage it. It's not sort of a chicken little sky is falling. We know all these acronyms, MFN and IRA and all that. We know it's out there. We've sort of done our due diligence, and we're also having
Yep.
dialogue with the government, so we're more comfortable that it's not a a black swan scenario.
Yeah. Well, so Jeff, go back to this direct to consumer, and I listened to Oz like everyone, and very quiet in the room. You could hear pin drops. They wanted to hear everything he had to say, and he's pretty aggressive, by the way. He's very direct and very succinct on it. Um, he was saying, and Albert was up there earlier on talking about Pfizer, but just because you came in and negotiated these 17 companies on some of these products and you lowered your prices is not letting you off the hook on MFN and IRA, right? So, that to me, you know, y- I think people felt, or at least I understood, that hey, maybe if we give Trump a win on some of these products and he can lower the prices, he gets his win, he'll leave us alone on these other things. But that doesn't seem to be the way that's going to play out, Jeff. Did you read any of this?
It's interesting how you say that because I think again, as I said, the pharma CEOs have certainly showed a willingness to have the dialogue with the administration and believe that when they do so, they will be free from other harm. And I think you're right. Dr. Oz and others have indicated that just because you're willing to, do certain things doesn't mean you're going to be off the hook across the board. I think it'll remain to be seen whether that's true or not. Certainly, in my mind, the pharma companies have really lined up to play ball and bring some sense of normalcy and comfort that they know at least what they're up against. But you're right. It does seem like there's then even after they've gone ahead and done that, even at the biggest companies, there's a little bit of a curveball. I think this year will be a little bit interesting too, as we have a switch over
Mhm.
in farm trade association from Albert to Paul Hudson, who is an English CEO of a French company now really
Right,
leading
Sanofi. Yeah.
trade um, uh, organization. So it'll be interesting to see if anything changes in their position around this.
Yeah, so and you're a great person to segue into this because you sit on the boards of a few pharmaceutical companies. Some of them are not domiciled in the US and they're foreign. And, you know, there's talk that Norway might set the price if you're one of the big US manufacturers, where you might have given a 60 to 70% discount to JCAs and European countries and not the US. With MFN, that exposes that. So you know, how would is there noise? Is that a reality that the US prices will be coming down? Will European prices be going up? Do we launch differently? How do we protect our products? I mean, and or will we see some kind of neutral pricing in the world and not have the US look, you and I are taxpayers and
Yeah,
US
yeah.
citizens. Why should we pay the highest prices in the world for products we develop?
Yeah, and generics too, by the way. We pay the highest price.
Yes.
So Bert, there's so much to unpack there, but it's really interesting because as much as I felt that there was less angst at JP Morgan because there was more understanding of the repercussions of all of these acronyms. I think the opposite actually in Europe. To your point, I sit on two European boards of public pharma companies. Awkwardly, they're Danish companies, so I'm actually going to next week on
You're going to
Sunday.
Greenland to have this meeting, right?
And they all look at me like I'm crazy because they're really concerned about this Greenland issue, and they're sort of right in the crosshairs. Even more so, though, the CEOs of some of those companies that I sit on the board of are actually very involved in the European Medicines Association and stuff, and it feels like they don't have a real strategy for what this really means. And even coming out of Davos, right after JP Morgan, I don't think it was very clear the repercussions of it. To me, it's going to be much harder. It's much harder to put the toothpaste back in the tube around existing price points in Germany, with the NHS in the UK, in Scandinavia. But the bigger repercussions really are, as you mentioned, around launch strategies. I mean, I think are going to be very real issues for particularly American-based companies to decide whether or not they will ever launch in Europe because of its potential impact on pricing in the US. So you may create a situation where medicines are just not available, or that as much as there's an over reliance now on the US market,
Yeah,
does it even become more important? And it gets really complicated
absolutely.
for some of the European based companies like the Recordati's, Chiesis, Lundbeck's, UCBs of the world that are, based in Europe. But I think it's early days. I don't think
Yep.
they've figured out, the answer to the riddle. But I guess hopefully over time, you'll see as new drugs launch. Hopefully, Europe will be able to eh, have prices
Hmm.
that are more to the value of the product in the therapeutic class that it's participating in, like we have here in the US.
So if I'm sitting in the strategy room, I'm thinking, all right, I've seen the smoke signals. MFN, IRA, it's not going away. It's coming. Not only do I have to worry about my US market, but I got to worry about my foreign market to my pricing. I got a lot of thinking to do. This is going to be because we don't know.
Yeah.
MFN is going to be all in calculations, including foreign pricing and that. So it'd be very, very interesting. So I think the consultants are going to be very happy for the next couple of years trying to help everyone try to figure this one out.
Bert, it's funny because again, we've been doing this for a really long time, and I used to bristle at people saying, "Oh, well, you're the market access guy." But I think we're seeing now in 2026, what you're really saying is that issues around the value proposition, pricing, reimbursement, launch strategies, health outcomes are paramount. It used to be that biotech and VCs, and that's why I think right to your beginning comments around investment in deals is that it used to be about the science, and people believe good science would win and the drug would be paid for. And now we're living in a world that really is very different, where pricing and reimbursement and the ability to talk about the value of a product and market access are as important. And the earliest stage investors are now starting to realize that and really starting to want to understand those component parts. It's not just about regulatory and safety approval anymore. You've got to
Right.
be able to defend the fact that a drug will be reimbursed on a global basis as well.
Yeah, so and I guess, the science has never been better in certain areas, but, there's a new a very, very much impactful thing happening, AI. Jeff, I remember the dot-com era, when everyone came out in healthcare with their dot-coms, and there were thousands of them, and then 2 years later, there was only 100 left. I think there must have been 2 or 300 companies running around pitching AI and looking for investment. I'm sure there's gonna be a shakeout in this. It was the soup du jour. What's your feeling on AI and how impactful it's gonna be? And, how do you even pick a winner or a loser at this point in that space? Is
Uh,
it gonna be doctors that lose because this, or health or patients gonna win from better information and better, prospective targeting and prescribing? Is it gonna be healthcare costs get affected? If I have 50 drugs in a category, well, look at multiple myeloma, look in our cancer space. 30 different drugs. You get down to very specific what drugs should be used on what person with AI. So how do you see this coming together or falling apart?
yeah, yeah. Well, I don't see it falling apart. I think to your point, I wish I had a crystal ball and could pick the two or three winners because I wouldn't be on this call right now. I'd be
You'd
investing
be
in.
sitting in St. Bart's
Yeah, exactly.
on the beach.
Exactly. But I think that was also one of the themes, certainly at JP Morgan, was AI is less of a buzzword and some more specific use cases. I can tell you even, and you see this probably as well, even in the boardroom. I mean, so much of our dialogue is around AI and how we're going to apply it. You raised a whole bunch of different stakeholders, physicians, patients, doctors. Hopefully science is one of the bigger winners in this because even from an R&D, so we're just going through the budgeting processes on some of the things that I'm on and really understanding how there are use cases around artificial intelligence to do research and development in a more efficient way in terms of finding targets, making quicker decisions, and that all then flows into the pricing discussion, right? Because if you can do that more efficiently and maybe at a cost
Oh,
savings, really understand where is the value creation around the
mm,
use of AI, and is one of them around being more efficient from an R&D perspective, and instead of spending 20-25% of your budget on R&D, are there more efficient ways to bring innovations to the market through using artificial intelligence? My overall view is that it's just such incredibly early days. I guess I've never had more angst around. I'd be interested in your thoughts, Bert. I've never had more angst
sure.
around wanting to learn something, and I've never been more motivated to not fall behind on something as I have been with AI. And I'm already falling behind because it's
Sure.
almost impossible to take off. But I worry even being relevant and even within my own organization, how do we use AI? What are the use cases? How do we be more efficient? And it's such early days, and there's so much information available. Again, even as
Mhm.
a board member, it's hard to help and direct people to understand where this is going and how we're going to, be most.
So many applications. I just had a conversation with the CEO of Integra Connect, and they're very big in the multi-billion range on RCM, and they're using AI in RCM. Not just science. Look, it's going to impact all of industry. But I think look at us. We used to carry a bag one day in the drug business when we started out. I mean, it's gonna come down to where technology is gonna make smart contracts, and it's gonna have, the legions of Salesforce, and you're gonna have a SEAL team probably to launch a drug and get into a marketplace and get into the pathways and the protocols, and use and the science is gonna have measurable endpoints. It's gonna, maybe even we get away from, I would hope one day, this, discounting and rebate and hope that you get what you bargained for to outcome-based agreements. The drug either performed or not, or the provider performed and we hit our endpoint, or you don't get full payment.
And Bert, you and I have been huge proponents of value-based arrangements or outcomes-based arrangements for the better part of a decade. I think we're probably both still surprised that it hasn't taken off the way that we hoped. And that was the absence of payers, right? The view, I think you and I share the view that being able to go at risk for the performance of your scientific innovation in a patient population that leads to a better outcome at a lower cost that everybody can agree upon and go at risk for and know that you get what you pay for is the holy grail of
Yeah.
all of this. So if AI can somehow support
Right.
that, and help measure that and have everybody agree on outcomes, that would be a great use case for AI.
Yeah, I mean, every time you talk about outcome-based agreements or smart contracts in healthcare, it always comes down to, well, they're too hard to measure, too hard to implement. We don't have the data, and that's where I see AI making the big difference. Is interoperability, having the data, the comparative. It's almost in the real world. You're going to be in a head-to-head study against every other drug. You're going to know which cohort and at what disease level and what to do, and probably, the experts in AI, like Doug Flora and others that I know, are talking about, the predictiveness of this, being able to forecast your cancer and when and how to prevent it. So it's extremely interesting. So will that shrink the pipeline and the opportunities? And maybe that's why the market's a little hesitant, Jeff. Like how many PD-1s do I need in the marketplace? And how big is that TAM, that total market share in that patient population?
Bert, I couldn't agree with you, but maybe that's the right thing to do. To your point, how many PD-1s do we need? How many companies are going after the next psoriasis drug or an immunology? And I can tell you, every BD presentation, every early biotech presentation says the same thing, that it's a huge category. If I get only the smallest amount of market share with a competitive product, a multi-billion dollar company. I think what we've seen though is that it doesn't necessarily play out that way. Certainly because of the payer element, but maybe it allows us to be more efficient and actually go after targets that are helping solve broader healthcare problems. Again, that's why I say it's so helpful to have people, the rest of the ecosystem there, because I can tell you when I was at United and people came with either a value-based contract or they wanted to talk about something, they never asked, what are the problems that you as a healthcare delivery entity are trying to solve for? They wanted to come and sell their specific problem in a niche indication of Angelman syndrome or something else where there were a handful of patients rather than solving broader issues around cardiovascular disease or cardiometabolic disease.
Jeff, next year, will the payers return to JP Morgan?
I don't know. I wonder if this year was just sort of now standard practice now, and they'll be at other meetings and just won't come. I hope we can create an environment there where there are multiple stakeholders there talking about value. Look what just happened yesterday with the health plan stocks based on the news around Medicare reimbursement. So there's just complete, we're completely knocking heads together. This is around the patient affordability issue as well, because there's just this continued shifting of the cost burden from the insurers to the patients, and it's not helping with outcomes in any way, shape, or form. And the pharma industry is plugging those holes with foundation assistance and things like that rather than solving the broader problem.
We'll see how that. So, so Jeff, I'm going to change my semant. I'm going to get rid of the word drama and go to uncertainty again, because I think we talked about a lot of uncertainty, a lot of stuff that we're going to have to figure out. The industry is going to have to figure out. It's evolving, right? And so this is going to be a very interesting year. Do you agree?
I do, and again, I tend to be generally more glasses half empty than glasses half full. But when I look at other reflections on J.P. Morgan, there were certainly a lot of glasses half full reflections, particularly around science and the nature of science. And no matter what anybody says about drug affordability and what's happening in Europe, the science, it is true. The science, and not to sound Pollyanna about it, but the science has never been better or more intriguing. I'm not qualified to talk about China, but that was, I think, another theme where people talked about China and innovation and a lot of noise there. Will that finally come to fruition? I think we've been
Yep.
talking about that for a while, but there's still tremendous opportunity out there, as cynical as we may sound.
Yeah. So, Jeff, you and I have been around, we know each other, 25 years or so, I think. And we've been in the industry a long time. Things move very slow in healthcare, right? And sometimes it's at a frustrating pace. But would you have to, would you say yes and no to this? Are things going to accelerate change and innovation? Are we going to see an accelerated pace going forward? I have my opinion. I want to hear yours.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the PBM. I think there will be accelerated paces in science, and as we discussed, particularly with the relevance and utilization of artificial intelligence with very specific use cases that allow us to be more efficient. I think you will see a pace of change there. I think I've said in terms of the limited incentive for disruption of the existing model of healthcare delivery in the US. I still think we're sort of stuck in that model and just aren't going to see that. That's why I'm a little excited about the direct to patient stuff. I'm just a little bit concerned that it only lends itself to certain therapeutic classes and certain products. Obviously, I think what's going on in obesity is revolutionary and could be sort of an inflection point for all of these different pieces of the healthcare ecosystem to come together, right? Because you can see the results. There should be healthcare results. I think we haven't yet bottled what that means for the broader healthcare system in terms of potential savings and measurement and also patient accountability. The only other thing that I think about that we really touched on that I get a little bit concerned about is potential shortage of providers in general. So you mentioned the healthcare professional a little bit, but I
Yeah.
think it's going to be a challenge, particularly in the U.S. market. I think we're going to be facing a shortage of providers, which again would may be supported and
Mm.
helped by AI, direct to
AI.
consumer.
Yeah. I agree. That kind of wraps up this for us, Jeff. And I really want to appreciate you for all the years I've known you. You've provided great insights and leadership to the industry, and I hope you stay around for a lot more years doing that. Certainly, I've committed to be around a few more years to try, and I'm hoping that we're going to sit here one day and go, "Gee, look, it actually happened. It did
Yeah,
change for the better." And
right back at you. I feel absolutely this. It's the mutual admiration society, but I also feel like I talk about this. It's sort of, and I think you feel the same way. It's sort of my life's work. I'm now not doing this for any other reason than I believe in it, and I believe in the
yeah,
importance of affordable access to medical innovation that's going to benefit patients. So it's sort of become a life's
yeah.
work.
Hey, and you and I both know how privileged we are to be able to be in healthcare because we have had serious implications with people that we love in our lives, and without our connections and our understanding of healthcare, we would have been a mere mortal on the street, and we probably wouldn't have had the great outcomes that we're seeing when you know how to navigate a very complex system like ours. So, we're very fortunate. We know that, and maybe that's why we're putting in this time like today, Jeff, to try and share the knowledge and change the world. This wraps up today's episode of Value Based Voices, brought to you by the Association for Value Based Cancer Care. Again, I want to thank Jeff Berkowitz for sharing your insights with us today, and to our listeners for you joining in this conversation. If you found today's discussion thought provoking, be sure to subscribe to Value Based Voices, wherever you get your podcasts from. Stay tuned in the future for more episodes that spotlight these important voices, these leadership voices shaping the future of oncology.